Hello, everyone. It is Jennie and Laurie of Astropath, and we are here to do the horoscopes for the month of February 2026. We did already post a video on the general month itself, and now we're going to talk to each of you individually. And basically, when you watch these, you want to watch the one for your rising sign. You can also watch for your sun sign and even your moon sign. You might get some other information there, but primarily we are thinking about it from the perspective of your rising sign. Now, all the information you need is below this video as far as how to contact us, each of us, directly for consultations or whatever you might need around astrology. Let me see. Be sure to like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe, do all those things that really help us. That would be great. So,
Mhm.
without further ado, we're going to talk a little bit about the month at hand, and then we'll go directly into the individuals. You can skip all this if you want, or listen if you want a little deeper understanding. Okay,
Yeah. Okay.
ready to go?
So yeah, let's start with just the calendar. So before we kind of just jump into this, which we're going to talk kind of briefly, it is very clear that the keynote of February has to do with the planet Uranus, or Uranus, as I usually say, actually. But that is the keynote. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what Uranus symbolizes. But it's really pretty straightforward because there is some intense squares. All the planets and the inner planets are in Aquarius, and they're all squaring Uranus. So we want to talk a little bit about what squares are. And there's a couple other things, little minor details like solar eclipse in Aquarius, square. Guess what? Uranus. And then planets go into Pisces. But there's a very clear pattern involving Uranus. And when I think of it, I think of that planet as the rule breaker. It's the planet of awakenings, it's the planet of disruption. It invokes things like freedom, liberation, reform. There can be a feeling of discontent that happens wherever Uranus goes through your chart because its job is to break up stagnation. Its job is to be the sort of jackhammer of the planets and find all those places in our lives as us little humans like to get really stuck in our ways and we like to be comfortable. And Uranus is a huge invitation to get comfortable with discomfort.
Mm.
And so I kind of, that's what I think of. Lori, what are some of the things you think of? Like, what are your keywords for
I
Uranus?
love Uranus. It can be a difficult planet. It can also be an extremely exciting. I think of Uranus as very much like there's two sides to it. There's the extreme anxiety and there's the extreme excitement. And I think of those as two sides of the same coin. If you're having a lot of anxiety during Uranus times, you always want to look for the excitement. There's the idea of expect the unexpected. So if you're expecting something exciting, just watch out because it's expect the unexpected. And I also think of different things like, you put your fingers in a light socket and everything changes in a moment. Uranus can create changes very fast, and it's sort of like a cutoff between the past and the future. It's like, yeah, you put your fingers in a light socket, everything changes. You see something, you can't unsee it. I always remember that one big Uranus transit that I had that I literally was struck by lightning, and it changed everything in a very positive way. At the moment, it was terrifying, and that's one of the things to think about with Uranus is the shock that can
Mhm.
happen can ultimately bring a profound gift. So, don't be scared of Uranus transits, but keep an eye on them.
Yeah. And I think, this time we're living in, as we all know, is a time of a lot of upsets, changes, pivots, all kinds of things going on in the world right now. And you can think of that in astrology as kind of what's happening with the outer planets. They've all moved into these new signs. They're all engaged with each other. So there's a
Mhm.
story that's unfolding. That's the outer planet story of how they're engaging with each other and moving into these these yang signs. So they've gone from these internal yin signs all into these external signs. We can really see that in the way everything's being stirred up. And because of that interaction, it's kind of like the outer planet or the external world is being brought right into our living rooms at this point, and we can't avoid the reality of the change that's happening, no matter how much we want to stick with our comfortable things and act like everything's staying the same. It just isn't. And this month of February is really about allowing yourself to start closing the door on a story in your life that does not serve you anymore. Some kind of rigid story that you're really holding on to, that you really wanted to stay, and Uranus is saying, nope, you've got to change it. And that's really the square. You've got Mercury, then Venus, then the Sun, then Mars, all squaring your Uranus this month in succession. And it's really serving to break apart these stories that we have and force us to face what is changing. And yes, this can be anxiety producing, just like Laurie said. But also things need to change and they are changing. And we can either choose to face that and do what we can to move with it, or we can resist and resist and resist, which we will be the ones that break apart if you hold on to rigidity like that. So the message here is about what do you need to release inside of yourself, what internal story can now be broken apart, so that you can move with the evolution of the times, really. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. Because we have an eclipse in the middle too, we are talking about closing a door on an old story. These squares that Laurie just highlighted, those four squares, they are closing squares, meaning that they're closing down a story that began sometime probably around 2018.
Right.
So you can kind of put that in your mind. And yeah, I don't know. That's kind of, do you have anything to add to all that blather I just put out there?
Yeah, well, the other thing that I think is really interesting is right before all these squares, Uranus stations direct.
Hmm.
And it has been retrograde since September 5th. So, if you think about Uranus as the planet of awakening, what kind of went underground in September? What happened in September that kind of slowed down a process? And now there's this awakening to it's moving forward. So Uranus goes direct and then it makes all these squares. So it re-engages the process of moving forward and
Mm.
then creates this stress, this anxiety, this excitement on the need to close down this storyline.
Yeah. And it's so good that you mentioned that station direct, because what's funny about Uranus is it seems like something happened overnight, overnight awakening, but the reality is it's a longer process. It's just that it's the tectonic plates moving beneath the surface, and you kind of are like forced to see it here and there, but then you kind of sweep it back under, and it's really, it will erupt into this awakening that might feel overnight, but it's really reflective of a longer process. And that's what the kind of retrograde cycles show us.
Yeah.
And so it is really interesting how it stations direct right before, and then you have these squares. It's really a very clear message, I
Yeah,
think.
so with all
Yeah.
these squares, Uranus is basically standing still. I mean, it is. It's
Mhm.
standing still, which makes it in itself so much more powerful than when it's moving. It's
Yeah.
holding its ground. It's like you got to work with this or else. And I
Yeah.
love how you said, it brings the outer world, these outer planets being so activated during this time. It brings the outer world, the stories that are going on when we turn on the news. It's bringing all of that information right into our living rooms, right into our lives. We can't avoid it. We can't unsee what we see.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, there's a couple other little details of the storyline here, and then we'll move on to the individuals. But I'd like to add a couple things. One is that notice that most of the squares, the one with Mercury, Venus, and the Sun, those are all occurring before the solar eclipse on February 17th, which is also Mardi Gras, which is why we have a Mardi Gras theme on our colors here. But those things are all a little bit, those first squares are a little more underneath the surface, a little more internalize, like you're really kind of grappling with that. Then you hit the solar eclipse. And I always think of a solar eclipse as an opportunity. And this is a north node solar eclipse. So it's trying to push our trajectory into the future.
Mhm.
But what it necessitates is that you really turn back and look, am I closing the door well? How
Mhm.
do I close the door? It really highlights that endings theme that we're seeing with the squares anyway. And so you have that moment of, oh, okay. And I think the story is something about, shedding the story that we're all disconnected, from each other, and really planting the seed of like this new story of, no, we are very much interconnected. And I'm talking about it in an Aquarian humanitarian sort of way. Aquarius is the collective, but it's an intellectual sign because it's an air sign. So we're not warm and fuzzy. We're talking about scientifically we have this interconnectedness. And then the sun goes into Pisces, and that's following suit of Mercury's gone into Pisces by then, and Venus has gone into Pisces. And that just brings in this note of softness, this time of like, okay, this something happened. Now you can start to absorb it through the Pisces. Pisces is like rest and restoration, and also grief.
Yeah.
There may be some need to really allow for grief to arise and let yourself, feel it and shed tears as needed. I mean, that was definitely part of the story here.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And we've got Mercury going retrograde in the midst of all of this and the retrograde shadow and all of that. But we're not going to talk a whole lot about that. I just can't help it. I have to
But
note that on February 2nd is Imbolc. I just have to say that. Just, that midpoint there in the seasons that's, when I just would encourage on a very simple statement here. Go outside on February 2nd as the sun's going down and take note of the time because the
mm,
sun is coming back rapidly at this point. And it's one of the things I just love about February is we
mhm.
start getting that late afternoon light.
Yes. Thank you for bringing it in because I think that's a wonderful way to think about the tension of this month is, the smaller stories, how do you manage it on a day-to-day basis? And
Mhm.
yes, going outside, and I've just been on this big kind of skiing kick lately, which is, newer to me, at least the kind of skiing I'm doing, and I just cannot say enough how much fun it's been. It really surprised me, but it's really helping me deal with my stress. It's
Well, I
helping.
think, yeah, using our bodies. I mean,
Yes.
I'm not out skiing, but I've been going to the Y every day and working out and walking on the track. And I just feel like, after my knee replacement last year, I feel like, the engagement of the body is so important when it comes to these kind of stresses. Yeah, I think that's super important.
Nice. And then I realized I just forgot to mention at the end of the month, the zinger is Mars square Uranus, which is happening after the first quarter moon in Gemini. I imagine that week being pretty tricky. So you're going to need all those methods we just talked about, whatever it takes for you to find ground, find center, connect with people that value you, and make you feel good and solid in yourself. You're going to need all those resources at your disposal. Mars square Uranus is definitely the most intense in my mind of these squares, and it's kind of coming after the moon phase is already growing in light. It's in a pretty active space, except for the Mercury retrograde by then. But just didn't want to miss that because that is a huge thing. So
That is. I mean, it's sort of when the sun goes into Pisces, we almost feel like we can just kick back and rest. And then there's that.
yeah,
But it's part of the same story. And it's
it
part of the
is.
same story. Okay.
Okay, so let's start out here with air. Oops, I
Oh,
forgot to uncolor. Hold on. Let me
oh,
clear all those. There we go.
oh,
Try
thank you.
again. And we're going to go right to Aries rising. I know that's no surprise. Okay, so those of you who have Aries rising, this story that we've just been describing of some kind of tension in all of our lives that we're having to manage, for you with Aries rising, it is happening in your second and your 11th house. You can see the sun up there in the 11th house, edging into Pisces, and then that's Uranus in the second house. And so, first of all, let's just think back to 2018.
Mm.
What new story has been kind of vying for your attention for these several years that has to do with how you value yourself? Is there a financial story? Is there a story about your resources, your possessions? Is there something about the way you hold your own self-esteem that you can think of that has been really shifting in these last few years? And so now, as we reach this February 2026, there's really this is time to close that chapter. This is the time to kind of bring something to a close. And what is being brought to a close when you add the sun and Mercury and Venus and Mars all in Aquarius up there is something about your community. So that's where the kind of the spotlight is shining on your community. And then the subtext, the other story is about how you value yourself in those community settings. So that's kind of where the tension is playing off. And that's where you really want to think about, what story do I need to close? Like, is it something like, I don't feel valuably enough to be part of this community, or, this community doesn't really resonate with my own values. What is the kind of the story there that is being told? And when that solar eclipse comes on the 17th, it's going to really bring a pivot point in that area of community that is going to, I don't know, in a way, sort of force a reckoning with what you need to shed, what story needs to come to a close.
Mm.
So, yeah, something along those lines.
Yeah, I like that. Just thinking about how resources and community work together and where stress can be created between those areas. And yeah, maybe there is a story where you have to release the community that you've had a deep attachment to for many years, or a new community that's calling you on the other side of that. So yeah, expect something to be occurring in that area of community and to really need to make some changes there.
hmm Yeah, I always think of these people in my life that have, these different rising signs. And I was just thinking about somebody who's opening up a new community business, and they're opening it up right around that eclipse, and what difference that's going to make to the way they view themselves in the community. It's going to probably, I really hope that it's going to change their financial situation for the better, that they're going to be, there's a nice interplay. And I was like, what a perfect time for this person to be kind of opening up that business. I think, but it's a good example too to think about what are the connections between
Right.
your money and your
How does the
yeah.
community that you're involved in support you financially
hmm
or, just in terms of your self-worth?
Yes.
And if that's not, if your community is not supporting you either financially or through your self-worth, then that's probably what needs to be released.
Yes. Yes, because the story after this one, so you're really focused on these endings, what needs to end, what rigidity can you shed? The story after that is a story of, first of all, where do you release into softness, where Pisces is? As all the planets then move into Pisces, there's a softening, there's sort of like a release or an allowance of yourself to feel whatever the tension has been intellectually in with this square. So I think there's something about that too.
And it's preparing you for a huge shift and change, which you've probably gotten a glimpse of some months ago. It's preparing you for a really big change in your immediate environment.
Yes. Yeah.
When Uranus moves into Gemini over the early summer, there's going to be like a real awakening and change that this is preparing you for around
Mhm.
how you use your voice within the context of your immediate environment.
Nice. Yeah. So think about that. What needs to end? Where do you need to evolve? And then I think you ready to go to Taurus?
Let's go to Taurus.
Okay, Taurus rising.
All right. So, for those of you with Taurus rising, I hope you listened to the beginning part of this video or our last general video on February because we covered a lot there just in terms of the importance of really what's happening here. This is really a month. February 2026 is a month where we have to be looking at what it is in our lives that is closing down in preparation for something new that's going to occur. But right now, our focus is on what's closing. Our understanding is that the greater world is really impinging on our individual lives in a big way. Now, for you with Taurus rising, this is a really personal story of how how your personality, your expression of yourself has been under a lot of pressure to change over the past since 2018, 7 years or so. There's been a lot of change in just how you show up as a person on a personal stage. This month, the focus of that change really is impinging on your career, your social reputation. There's a lot of stress that's showing up in relation to your personal changes. The stress is showing up in your career or social reputation. You know, our social reputation and our career, it's where people see us, and yet our personality itself is something totally different. And when those two are in conflict, there can be some difficulty. So this being a month of release and letting go, what is it that's being pressurized in your outer world, career, or social reputation? What is it that you have to release there? There's something that has been held tightly that needs to release in preparation for big changes around your self-worth in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know this one, it is interesting thinking about how Aquarius and Taurus are fixed signs. And for this person, the first house is, how you project yourself, and the 10th house is your social or professional persona. So these are very powerful houses, and this is a powerful earthquake that has gone through the way you present yourself since 2018. And this is the crux point, the moment of like, okay, I'm really ready to shed that rigid way of holding myself I had before and allow this much more inventive, innovative, sort of revolutionary energy to come through in your workspace and just how you show up in the world. I think this is a potent one for these folks. And I
Yeah.
do have I have a relative with this, and I just can't help but think about how much she has changed. I mean, how much her work life has changed, who she is, and how much she's brought her own sort of Taurus energy to the work that she's doing. I mean, it's this, it's
Wow.
really clear. And just, remember that there's a solar eclipse that's going to happen in the 10th house if you're Taurus rising. And so that pivot point is probably going to be feeling pretty external, I'm going to guess, just because of where it is, but it could be internal. But there's a real switch. It's like, okay, nope. And that's the moment of like, all right, I think I can embrace the discomfort and allow this change and go with it and collaborate with it. I mean, that's really the message.
Yeah, so what you're letting go of is some way that the world has seen you.
Mm,
Yes?
yeah.
It's sort of like all of this change that's gone on in your personality now has to be shown publicly.
Mm,
So there's
yes.
some way in which you have held yourself in the public sphere that needs to be tucked away and allowed to change.
Yeah, and then once that kind of wave of intensity that's certainly showing up in February, once that crosses over, then and things move into Pisces, you're going to get some time to digest, to kind of retreat into, in your case, the 11th house. So retreating into those community spaces that feel really nourishing to you, that help you get in touch with feelings. For my person I have in mind, my relative, I'm definitely thinking about those yoga classes where you just soften into
Huh.
these people who've got you. And so I think that that's the other part is like once we passing through that gauntlet, there's the softness that we'll get this window of time to kind of soften into after.
And
So,
it's fascinating to think about the future awakening next summer when Uranus goes into Gemini. It's like
mhm.
those changes that feel so kind of overwhelming and difficult at this time are really preparing the ground for an awakening around your self-worth. And it could show up as money or, yeah, in some way that ability to really value the self is going to be awakened. And this is
Awesome.
part of the preparation for that.
Hmm. Okay, cool. So let's go to Gemini rising. Alrighty, so those of you with Gemini rising, this story, this picture that Laurie and I have been painting in these last few minutes or whatever it is, for you, it's landing in an interesting place as Gemini rising. So let's just start with the blue bowling ball there is, is Uranus. And you've had Uranus cruising through your 12th house since 2018. And so what that really represents is I think of it as like a till, like plowing up a field. So it's plowing up the field of your subconscious, your unconscious. There's been things that have been turned up, in the deeper reaches of your being that you may or may not be aware of. I'm sure you're aware of some of them, depending, what other planets this might have hit as Uranus has gone through there. But there's also other unconscious processes that are just happening anyway, whether or not you're aware. So that's what the meaning of Uranus going through 12th house. Not the easiest to digest, but you can certainly think of it as even a jackhammer breaking up stagnant old subconscious stuff. And meanwhile, during this month of February, when you have all of these planets in Aquarius, so you've got, Mercury, Venus, the Sun, and Mars, they are all in Aquarius, lighting up your ninth house. So, in conjunction with that subconscious process, you have a much more obvious process or a conscious thing that's happening in your ninth house of your worldview, the place where you can think critically. I know, Laura, you talked a lot about beliefs when we were discussing this one, and that's a great thing to think about because what we're trying to do here in the month of February, all of us, is figure out what we need to close the door on. And in this case, there is a rigidity around a story, a worldview, that it's time to let that worldview go and open to a new way of thinking about things. And I think that that's ultimately what we're trying to do is release the stagnation of a certain way of thinking. And you have this opportunity, and it's not easy with these squares. It's stressful. It brings stuff up, but it's an important work. And especially when you kind of get on board of the fact that there's a solar eclipse also happening in the ninth house on February 17th. So there's a clear pivot point, a clear point of like, I'm closing the door on that way of doing things, and I'm going to open the door on a new way of working with this material. So I don't know, that's how I think about it.
I really like this one a lot because I think about Uranus moving through that 12th house. And there's two different ways we can really think about that. It's, breaking up over these past 7 years, a breaking up of what your understanding of your own unconscious has been. It also can show up as your spiritual understanding, I think. So there's something in that hidden away material of your unconscious, your spiritual beliefs that's been being broken up. And at this time, you think about that area which is still raw from the jackhammer, so to speak, and the insistence that your worldview, that ninth house, has to be changed because of that. So
Mhm.
there's a closing down, like you said. I mean, you said it great, and I'm just reiterating, but there is a way that you have to close something down in this strict beliefs that you have had, that this new understanding of your own unconscious is demanding that you see the world differently. It's
Mm,
really as simple as that. And the preparation, what this is preparing you for, I think, is when Uranus goes into Gemini early in the summertime, there is going to be a real awakening to your own truest, most authentic self.
Mm.
And you're
Yeah, being
going
able
to
to
be
step
able to
yeah.
express yourself in a really new way because you've got a new understanding of your own depths and your own worldview.
Mm. And also, too, it's important to remember that after the sun is finished with Aquarius, and same with Venus and Mercury and Mars, they're all going to move into Pisces. And I really like that because I think this is an intense, disruptive situation we have in February. It is not going to be an easy thing. But after, when those planets go into Pisces, is going to be a really good time to let yourself kind of settle back, to rest, to find whatever respite is available to you in your professional life or your social kind of reputation life. Those people who really understand you from that perspective in that very public way. It's going to be, there'll be some respite and kind of like, okay, settling into that because Pisces really represents allowing some of that grief to come out from change. There's always grief with change. All of the small deaths that all of us live through many, many, many times in our lives. And it really is important to give yourself the space to feel the feelings and let those changes settle in. So that'll be more what we talk about in March and with that whole Mercury retrograde and Pisces and all that jazz. So I think that's a pretty good picture. I hope.
I think so
Yeah.
too. I think so too.
Okay, let's
Okay.
move on to Cancer rising.
Cancer rising. Okay, so for those of you with Cancer rising, first of all, I just want to say if you didn't watch the beginning, I hope you will, because it'll give you kind of a grounded sense of what we're talking about here. This month, February 2026, is really a time that the outer world, the big picture stories of what's going on in the world are very obvious to us. We can't avoid them, and they are part of what we're talking about and in the middle of. So, at any rate, what we want to think about if you've got Cancer rising, you've been in a process for quite a while, since 2018. You've been in a process of changing your understanding. And I use the word change, like I want you to understand that this is a big change. It's not just like a shift in perspective, but Uranus going through your 11th house has been like a jackhammer. I love that you use that term, Jennie, a jackhammer on your community. And when I say community, it's the people, the groups, and the people who support you um, in a really powerful way. And you want that area to be stable and steady. But over these past years, it hasn't been. And there's been a lot of changes to that area of your life. You may be really learning how to accept support, or you may realize that the communities you're attached to aren't giving the support you require. So there's some deep, powerful change that has been going on for quite a while there. Now, what's happening in February is that change is really pressuring your ways of setting boundaries in important, relatively intimate relationships. It's putting a lot of pressure on, yeah, how you navigate deeper connections with other people. There's a lot of stress there. So, what does that mean? Are you navigating stresses in those relationships with community? Are those communities you're involved with creating stress for your more intimate partnerships? Think about how that's really working in your own individual life. And because this is, the eclipse happens there in your eighth house as well, there's something in how you're navigating these deep layers of relationship that has to be released. There's some boundaries possibly that you have held over many years that you're holding in a too tightly. Maybe you have to really re-navigate or work your understanding of how you set boundaries. Maybe you
Mm,
have to revisit your boundaries altogether
yeah.
and rewrite them. I think there's someone in the room that has this, particular pattern. Maybe I should let her speak.
No, you're really angling in on all the kind of the stuff that's really the tension in a Cancer rising chart with these two pieces. And there is something, it's funny with the eighth house because I think it's so easy just to go, oh, boundaries. We talk about boundaries a lot. But guess what? You know, the eighth house is somewhat of a mysterious house. So I always like to think that the boundaries are an art. They are not a science. They are completely an art form. And I say this because you have different boundaries with different people. I mean, they're completely organic and they're different on different days. You know, so there's a I think that the softening that needs to happen here, like there's a rigidity around a boundary's a wall, right? Especially with a Saturn ruled sign here, right? And that's not the truth at all. Boundaries are more fluid than that. They're not walls, and they move. They're organic again. So I think there's something about mastering the art of boundaries in a different way that you're being pressed to do and kind of look at, geez, where have I been pretty rigid? There might be a sense of, and I can identify with this in my life, like that one's a yes and that one's a no. And it's just not as clear cut as that on a daily basis. So there's some rigidity that needs to be shed around that because what is happening is that's blocking you from being able to open to a broader array of community, a broader array of different kinds of folks, like different, like diversity and things like that are actually available to you if you can just do the dance with the boundaries a little bit better. And with Aquarius there, it's like you can get creative, you can be kind of quirky. It doesn't have to look like everybody else's way of doing it. And that's where the new story is. What new story can you weave that really allows for that?
Yeah.
So I think, I really resonate with that. And you're right, like the eclipse point on February 17th, I feel like that's going to be a concise moment of time of like, you're really like, I want to close this door and I want to open that door because that's what eclipses do. And it really echoes the story we're already seeing with the closing square to Uranus.
Yeah.
So I think that's, yeah.
So the stress that's insisting on that change, that closing is coming from community in some way.
Yeah.
And this whole process is preparing us for Uranus's movement into Gemini, so whatever work you do here, whatever closing down you do around boundaries or navigating other people, whatever that story is for you, is really preparing you for a wide open new understanding of your own unconscious.
Hmm.
Oh, get ready for a deep dive into awakening to a part of yourself that's been in shadow.
Yes.
No matter
Well,
how old we are, no matter how many explorations we do into our 12th house, there's always more mysteries, more that's hidden.
hmm yeah, and I think the final little piece here is just what is this serving the purpose of is for you to kind of recognize the interconnectedness. It's time to close the door on the disconnection and open the door into a new sense of
Oh,
interconnectedness. And I
yeah.
really see that with this one with that eighth house. And then once all those Pisces or I should say planets move into Pisces, so the sun and Venus and Mercury will already be there by the time the sun does, and eventually Mars, you really kind of get to soften into, all right, how has my worldview changed now that I've done this door closing that has to do with this rigidity? How can my worldview become perhaps more forgiving, perhaps more compassionate? Perhaps you need to grieve a bunch of things, grieve the old way that you were thinking, to allow room for the new way. And that's what March will be more about, that we'll discuss later. But I think that's part of the piece too. So,
That's great. Okay.
okay, let's scoot along too.
Okay, let's talk about people who have Leo rising.
Hmm
So, first of all, I keep saying this, listen to the first part of the video if you didn't. It'll give you kind of a general idea of what's really going on here in February. February is such an interesting month. It really is. If you listen to our video for January, we talked a lot about power dynamics coming into focus. And in this period of time, what we have is kind of the next step on that. We hit some power dynamics, and now we're dealing with a new story, something that we have to release. Now, what's occurring here, if you look at that big blue bowling ball, which is Uranus, moving through your 10th house, this tells us that over the past 7 years, since 2018, Uranus has been moving through your 10th house, the area of your career, your social reputation. This is an area that traditionally through your life you have kind of trusted to be a certain way. And over these past 7 years, it has changed a lot. There's been a lot of upheaval in this area. Now, what's happening in February is that change, that shift in your career or your social reputation is really causing a lot of stress around your relationships. There's some way that relationship or you're under, it can show up in different ways. It might be about your actual partnership, your business partner, or your spouse, or your very best friend, these really significant relationships. It could also be showing up just in your understanding of what relationship means to you. You're really kind of grappling with how relationship, intimate partnerships, um, kind of can conflict with how you show up in the outer world. So there's some stress there that you're trying to navigate. Now, because there's an eclipse here in your seventh house this month, this is a closing square. There is something that you are releasing.
Mm.
You could think of it very simply. Oh, I have to release my partnership. And maybe you do. But you also, and you're going to know it, if what you need to release is a relationship, you don't need us to tell you that, right? You're already in the middle of it. But you might be releasing your own kind of rigid definitions of what a relationship means to you, and some way that the changes in your career over the past 7 years, the changes in how you're seen in the outside world, how that change reflects to you this, what needs to change in your understanding of what relationship means to you.
Mhm. Yeah, it's funny. I was just thinking as you're talking about like the seventh house of partnerships and 10th house of career. It's like that's like an old story, right? The tension between what's going on at home with the partner, and then the work life. I mean, it's just we're probably all familiar with those feelings in different ways, like whatever that might be. So and that's kind of the nature of these angular houses, the seventh and the 10th is like, yeah, we know this story. Um, and yeah, I think this is an important time. I think Laura, you've really captured the idea that there's just really a mindset around however you think of partnerships. This is a wonderful time to revisit that and let that be shed. And I can't help but think with Uranus going through the 10th house that, perhaps the universe is providing you with some examples. Maybe you can think of people you've encountered out in public or who you work with and what their examples of a relationship are, and just as an interesting reference point of like how that might be affecting the way you think about your one-on-one partnership. So anyway, I think we've kind of gotten the point across of like how those two areas are connected. And certainly that eclipse, as Laurie mentioned on February 17th, is a turning point. And really picturing yourself, what is the story that I've been telling myself for years and years and years about how I relate, and then walking into a new, perhaps less, slightly less predictable, but exciting way of handling yourself. And I think the other piece of the story is once those planets have gone, being in Aquarius and squared Uranus and this stressful thing that's brought up some stress and anxiety and hopefully some excitement, then they're all going to go into Pisces. And so that kind of brings up for you a chance to kind of rest back, to kind of settle into a little bit more of a comfortable space. Perhaps you may have to shed some tears, or perhaps because Pisces is associated with grief. So it might be that some grief is associated with letting the old story go. I mean, I tend to think that's usually the case. If you're doing it right, there should be a sense of sadness with what you have to let go of. And then allowing more kind of forgiveness and understanding to come into how you handle those partnerships. I think that's what the Pisces part and what the month of March can bring to us. So yeah.
And
What is there?
I have to bring in the other piece that
Yes,
I
do it.
just, this is so fascinating because I'm thinking of a relative of mine now that has this, whose partner died in the past year. And th this plays out that life more beautifully than I can even imagine. This is really amazing. What I'm seeing here is that this whole process is a preparation for when Uranus finally goes into Gemini in the early summer. This stress is really preparing for an awakening of a new way of being in community.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
know, a new way, like there's some storyline around relationship that is under stress and has to be released in order to join a community from a different place. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is really beautiful, but it is preparing for a new vision of community.
Yes. Okay. Ready for Virgo rising?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Although
That's
my
a good.
mind is stuck on that one still.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And you're kicking off Virgo, so
Oh, oh, here I am waiting for you to talk. Okay. So, Virgo rising. So, for those of you with Virgo rising, first of all, I just want to say, listen to the beginning of the video if you haven't. There's a lot of information there about just, what's really going on here, and we go into a lot that will help you understand these. But basically, what we're looking at is February is a time of closing down certain things. With Uranus having been moving through your ninth house for approximately 7 years now, there's been a lot of shift and change in your understanding of bigger picture ideas, your wisdom around the world at large, your worldview, to put it simply. There's been a lot of change in your worldview. At this point, with all of these planets and the eclipse going through your sixth house, there's a lot of stress being put on your day-to-day routines from this changed area of your worldview. Your new understanding of your worldview is pressuring and giving you an opportunity to change your lifestyle. Simply put, your lifestyle is being changed by the changes in your worldview. It's pretty simple, actually, if you just think about it that way. But there's
yeah.
a lot of stress here. How do I handle my dietary needs, my exercise needs, my day-to-day routines? How are those set up in a way that works for me, given my worldview, given my understanding of bigger world pictures?
Hmm.
I feel like I'm missing something big there, but you know, for anyone with Virgo rising, this area of worldview, day-to-day routines, which people tend to think, day-to-day routines, sounds kind of boring, but it's really the bedrock of how we manage our life. It is our lifestyle. And one thing, I was listening to somebody the other day talking about stuff going on in the sixth house, and they're like, if you want another pet, because pets are part of worldview, and I keep thinking about getting another cat, but so far I've resisted that urge. But at any rate, there's big changes being demanded. There's something that needs to be released. Bottom line, with the eclipse and all this pressure, there's something in the day-to-day routines that needs to be released. There's
Hmm.
some kind of rigid idea of your lifestyle that it's time to let go of.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that.
This one's yours. So
Yeah, I like that because
popping up.
in thinking about it as preparation for Uranus going into the 10th house, it's like, what you're closing down now in your idea of what your lifestyle is or has to be is preparing you for this wake up around your career or social reputation.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's great that you're putting it that way because I think part of the message here is like this is a process, right? This isn't just a moment in time. This is a longer process. We've got the longer process of you've mentioned, Laurie, of Uranus breaking up stagnation of your worldview, the way you think about things. That's been going on for a while. And then you've got the shorter process of, these planets in Aquarius coming around to the final square of, the year with Uranus, which is really bringing in that shedding thinking, like it's time to close something, closing that rigidity. And then again, with that eclipse, I think the solar eclipse on February 17th really brings in this moment of that's kind of the crux point of like, I really want to close the door on these rigid ways of doing my lifestyle. And I want to open the door to a new, more interconnected way of doing things, like maybe relying on other people in a new way in your routines, like connecting with other groups, which is part of the Aquarius piece, and just giving yourself I mean, you kind of get to reinvent yourself with this one. You get to reinvent what's happening in that Aquarius house. And then once those planets go into Pisces, meaning Mercury, Venus, Sun, and Mars are all going to end up in Pisces, you'll have a time to really kind of take a step back from the intense process that February brings and start kind of resting in those relationships that do support you, that do give you space to feel into the tender feelings, to feel into grief, to feel into softness, and where there's a more of an ease and a forgiveness that can happen. I think that's the meaning of those planets going into Pisces. So,
Fall in
and that's
love a little
really
bit.
helpful,
Fall in
right?
love a little bit, right?
Yes.
Find a
Yeah.
soft
Yeah.
connection. Yeah,
Totally.
finding a soft connection. And I was thinking about, with that letting go of something in the sixth house, that could be as simple as letting go of an unhealthy way of eating or
Yeah.
letting go of a particular kind of daily routine that just isn't working anymore.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So it's a time of shedding. It might not be the easiest month. I'm sure it won't be. But I also think that we really need to break up the stagnation and clear things out. That's really what's happening. So,
Yeah.
okay, you ready for Libra?
Ready to go.
So those of you with Libra rising, this whole process that Laurie and I have been talking about, this process of, what February is bringing to us, this opportunity to really think about closing the door on things we do not wish to do anymore, things we wish to shed. I think that that's a really big message with February, and it could be fairly intense and difficult at times. There could be some anxiety that comes up, but also there's some excitement embedded in this whole situation that's happening in February. So if you have Libra rising, that planet, that blue planet there, Uranus, has been in your eighth house, kind of breaking up old patterns of the way you handle other people, the way you handle other people's stuff, the way you handle your boundaries around other people's stuff. This house can have to do with money issues with other people. It can have to do with more emotional issues. But in any case, as a Libra rising person, it really is how you're navigating it with other people. And with Uranus there,
Mm.
there's been some breakup, changing situations going on since 2018. There's some way that you have been forced to, I don't know, see the cracks in the things that aren't really serving you. And this time period right now in February is all about seeing those and letting those things break apart that are not helping you. Because when these inner planets of Mercury, Venus, Mars, and the Sun, not in that order, but those inner planets are in Aquarius, they're squaring Uranus. And so that's bringing in this tension, and for you, Aquarius is in your fifth house. So there's something about the way that you give of yourself, the way you give love generously without, the need to kind of put any parameters of it is kind of banging up against this boundary system you have with other people. I mean, that's the kind of the deepest. There's other more exterior ways that might show up, but that's the deepest interior layer of what you're contending with is how is that not serving you anymore? What is the issue? Where are you being sort of rigid in how you give of yourself and the expectations you have of how everyone else is going to respond to that? I think is part of the story here. So it's the great news is this is a wonderful opportunity to start letting go of that. Like start letting go of that rigid way of holding yourself. Allow yourself to be more creative, more innovative in those creative processes.
Yeah, it's so interesting to think. I mean, this is somebody with Libra rising. They want
Yeah,
to please everybody, right?
right.
Anyone with Libra rising wants to please people. And here they are up against this, their ability since 2017 or whatever it was. Uranus has been going through that eighth house of how you set boundaries with other people. And that's a challenging thing for anybody with Libra rising. When you're trying to please everybody, it's difficult to set boundaries. And you've been really confronted with that difficulty and with changing that for quite a few years now. And at this point in time, that confrontation with your own ability to navigate people while keeping yourself healthy is really confronting how you give of yourself, how you give to the people that you love, your children, your creative processes as well. There's some way that your boundaries and your creative processes and your giving of love are in a conflict, and what you have to release is some way in which you give of yourself. You've
Yeah.
got to find a new way to give of yourself. So there's something that has to be released that you have held very tightly. Wow,
Yes.
that's really interesting. And
Hmm.
it prepares for a new worldview that will really expand over the coming summer. But this piece, this breaking up and this releasing of some way that you have expected yourself to give.
Yes.
That's what's
Yeah.
under the microscope, not the microphone.
Could be under the
Under
microscope.
the
You're doing stuff
under the
verbally here.
microscope.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this is, I had this one's pretty powerful. This is definitely like having to deal with that behind the scenes, like how you exactly like the way you share your love. And there's nothing wrong with sharing love. It's just that if you're pouring yourself out and it's not being received, it's not serving you in some way, it's draining you, there's an issue, and that's what you're really working with. And also, then the planets move into Pisces, the quick moving ones, like Mercury and Venus and Sun, and then Mars follows suit. They all go into Pisces, and that gives you a chance to kind of rest back in the routines that really support you. Like think about, after this intense month of February and things move there, you will have a chance to kind of sit back, have a little bit of respite, do things that really give you a lot of self-care. I think that's going to be helpful. You're going to need some self-compassion for that part because I feel like this is a little bit of a rough process, especially for the Libra rising folks. But there is, I think, a pillow and a box of Kleenex at the other end. So, um, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. What do you think? Think we
I
got that
think
one?
we're ready to move on.
Okay, let's go to Scorpio rising.
Okay. So, for those of you with Scorpio rising, first of all, I'm going to say it because I keep saying it. Listen to the first part of the video if you didn't already. It'll give you some groundwork on which to think about this. Now, for you with Scorpio rising, you come into the world with a lot of intensity, and yet, what you really want and need in partnership is stability. And yet, for the past 7 years or so, Uranus has been moving through that area of your chart that relates to partnership. So there's been a lot of change in that area. You've really had to encounter new ways of thinking about partnership or new partnerships or changes within your partnership. There's been a lot of kind of breakup happening there. Maybe not literally breakup, but you get the idea there. So with Uranus moving through that area, what's happening in February is that that planet is putting a great deal of pressure on the quicker moving planets. The Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, they're all moving through Aquarius throughout this month, and they're all coming into a square, challenging relationship with Uranus. And they're doing that from the fourth house. So the stress here for you with Scorpio rising is between your home and family, the core of your existence, and your partnership. What's the conflict? You want to think about what that conflict is, because that conflict, because it's a final quarter square, and there's an eclipse happening in the midst of this, also in your fourth house. There's something in the home and family area that needs to be released. What does that mean? Does it mean you have to move out? Maybe. Does it mean you have to change some dynamics within the home? There's something in that home and family area that has to be released.
Mm,
That's the
mhm.
first part of the story, right?
Mhm.
What it's preparing you for is a longer story that goes into the summer of really waking up to how you set boundaries in those partnerships. But I kind of digress there. I'm going to turn it over to Jennie.
Well, I think I mean, you've hit upon all the keynotes here, but I also think it's worth noting that, Scorpio is a fixed sign, so Scorpio rising, and the things going on in Aquarius is a fixed sign, and Taurus is a fixed sign. So there's a tendency with Scorpio rising, these are areas of rigidity. It's very typical that these are areas where you're really holding on to things being a certain way, and that having some stability, especially in the partnerships with Taurus, is something you really rely on. And you've really been forced to face, the way that has shifted and changed, and the ground has literally sort of sprouted cracks underneath your feet. And the trick to this, I think, is to kind of lean into the transformative nature of the Scorpio rising piece and
Mm.
recognize that, we're talking about fresh new green sprouts coming up out of the earth in your relationships. We're talking about a much more creative and innovative and exciting way of doing the family life with Aquarius there. Like, it's, yes, certainly it's fixed, but also Aquarius is so inventive. I mean, so this might be something like, doing more stuff with other families, like getting together and finding, how families can support one another, so that, guess what? You guys get to go on date night while the kids are all taken care of by the one family. Like that sort of thing could be a new way of visualizing. Like, where is it that's just an example, but where is there like, it has to be this way? And actually it doesn't. And it could really serve you to open the doors to a new way of thinking. And I do keep thinking that with all this Aquarius and Uranus in the mix here, of just like, this is a place where we might feel disconnected and sort of isolated. And now it's time to get interconnected and to really plug ourselves into the bigger group ethos around us to get the support that we need. And I think that that's a lot of what this one could be about, is just getting some oxygen down into that family place. I think that that could be really helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's big change afoot in the family and relationship area. And if we're living totally unconsciously, this could be, the ending of partnerships, the ending of where you currently live. If you're living consciously, you can work with these changes and you can see how your understanding of things can expand rather than contract. And yes, this is an ending,
Mhm.
but it can be an ending of a particular way of doing things
Yes.
or a
And
particular way of viewing things,
mhm,
the ending
that-
of a particular perspective that you've held on to. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. And then just a reminder, this is a process. So then those planets, meaning the inner ones of, Sun and Mercury and Venus and Mars, they're all going to go into Pisces. And that's where your focus will be drawn to. So after you get through this intense process that might feel kind of like, whoa, the ground is rippling beneath my feet, then you have a chance to really release into the things that bring you joy. I mean,
Right.
where Pisces is in your fifth house, that's a time to just, the things that really just make your heart sing, that's where you're going next so that you can kind of integrate this intensity that's happening that you can welcome in this change and then find that kind of respite when the planet's going to Pisces. So
I always think of one of my former husbands when I see the Scorpio rising one, and I like seeing this because I know that he has this incredible creative side that
mm,
he doesn't, I mean, I don't really know like now, but when he would tap into it, it was such a beautiful space. And that really does, like the stress can move into a reaching for the comfort of creativity.
nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
Let's
I can safely talk about him. I doubt if he's watching my videos.
you never know.
You never know. That's true.
Okay, well, let's go on to Sagittarius rising. So those of you with Sagittarius rising, this is a really interesting February. It's a time of closings, of endings. We have several different indicators that suggest that. So let's just kind of start at the beginning here, where the blue bowling balls, as we've been kind of calling it, of Uranus, which I actually love this little graphic of Uranus, but it has been going through your sixth house since 2018. So that is a symbol for a breakup of stagnation, a sort of a jackhammer or an earthquake or some way in which rigidity is being shattered or broken up so that new life can come forward. So not a very comfortable process, but a necessary one. And the sixth house is all about your routines. It's all about the things that you do to keep your health intact. So it's the way that you eat, the way you move your body, whether or not you meditate. Like, what are the things that really help you feel stable? And with Taurus in the sixth house, my goodness, you have a big focus. You really want things to be stable here. So chances are you know exactly what I'm talking about. Those of you with Sagittarius rising, the shifts that have happened to you since 2018, and that this period of time now, this whole month of February, really is providing this window of time to bring a close to the rigid way in which you perhaps have been holding yourself. The focus where the sun is in this chart is down where you have Aquarius, which is the way you use your voice. It's the way you get through your immediate environment using your voice. Sometimes it can be things like transportation and mobility. So you might want to kind of put that into the mix. But that's where the Aquarius planets are putting the focus. Like at this time now, that's where you might be like, "Ooh, okay, third house things, like the way that I'm talking, the way I'm using my voice, the way I'm moving through my local neighborhood are going to be the kind of hot topics." But the bigger changes happening in your lifestyle where Uranus is. And as the square happens, there's tension between these two places. And, one way I like to think about that tension is just simply like asking for what you need for self care,
Mm.
because your third house is how you're using your voice, and the sixth is your routine. So this is a change in the way you tell people about what you need, or you express what you've learned through your lifestyle choices, or maybe you have changes in a relationship with siblings. That can also be a third house thing, or neighbors. So that's kind of where the Aquarius planets are showing up. And the other piece I'll just throw in, before I stop talking so much, is just that there's a solar eclipse in the third house on February 17th. So that really kind of brings about a definitive point where you can say, I really want to close the door on this way I've been handling these parts of my life and open the door to a new way of doing things, a new way of using my voice, a new set of routines that better serve me and help me feel more connected to the people around me. This is not a process you're doing in isolation. So that's kind of the gist of February, in the way I see it.
Yeah, I sort of got stuck thinking about that area, siblings and neighbors, so something in that, in those kind of relationships, and of course how we use our voice and all that, but there's something that has to be wrapped up due to the pressure from your lifestyle.
Mm,
So the lifestyle is putting pressure on those relationships. The changes in your lifestyle is putting pressure on those relationships or on how you use your voice, and you have to end something there.
mm.
You
Well,
know,
mhm.
maybe maybe it's time to really revisit those relationships, sibling relationships,
Yeah.
neighborhood relationships. There's some way that your lifestyle does not connect with your neighbors. It could be as simple as that. This whole process, this whole stress in those two areas is, on the one hand, there's many ways to look at it, but it is preparing for a big change in relationships that you've probably gotten some hints of in, the past some months. But in early summer, there's going to be real awakening to new ways of being in relationship that
Mm,
this stress is preparing you for. So,
yeah.
it might be that you really realize that some rigid way in which you
Yeah.
use your voice, some rigid, like, I speak this way. Well, I mean, think about it. We're talking about somebody with a Sagittarius rising. This
Yeah.
person has big opinions. And their big
Yeah.
opinions may very well come out in very kind of solid ways of speaking.
Hmm.
And that is being pressurized. Change the way you speak
Yeah.
in order to take advantage of the awakening in relationship that's coming.
I know. I keep thinking about, yes, what you just kind of drew attention to, Laurie, which is the idea that Sagittarius is a mutable sign. So you appear to be sort of this more mutable, like, yes, you have an opinion, but you can change your opinion pretty quickly. But there's that, but that's very different than having a pretty rigid way, which is the fixed signs of Aquarius and Taurus, a rigid way of and how you learn, because third house is also learning, and also how you are attached to certain parts of your lifestyle must be a certain way. And I think that this is bringing you a little bit more into alignment with the more mutable nature of the Sagittarius rising. Like that's part of the, as you break apart the stagnation in exactly what you're saying, those, the third and sixth house, that you're releasing yourself to, to be a bit more fluid in how you handle these parts of your life, to be a little more inventive. And really, I just keep coming back to Aquarius being about the interconnectedness of humanity. It's a, it's an air sign, but it's also one of the signs that really refers to more collective forces. And so this is, bringing that collective mindset to these more personal parts of your life and going ahead and, embracing more of a group interaction, we'll say. um I don't know. I think that this is an interesting one. I really like those two houses. They have a lot to them. They have a lot of different meanings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I love doing these with you, Jenny, because it really, it just really shows us. I love doing these because it really clarifies the importance of the rising sign.
Yeah, and how these all
You
of
know,
this is a process, right?
right. All of this is a process. And people, when they're first learning astrology, they think the rising sign is, the expression of the personality, but it sets up everything.
Right.
It sets up the
Exactly.
entire structure. It is so much more than what most people notice.
Yeah.
And knowing that, studying astrology for 100 years and knowing that is kind of a basic understanding. But then doing these every month with you, it's like it just puts it right into the personal every time. It's really powerful.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I know these are fun.
Not
Yeah.
to go off on a tangent or
No.
anything, but there you go, Sagittarius. I
Up
went
there.
off on an opinion.
Uh, yeah, and that's, the only other thing, because we were just talking about this is a process, the other little piece is that all those planets move into Pisces in March, and actually this month and coming up after this intense time of everything being in a square, and that'll be a time to really kind of settle in into your home life. Like, what makes you feel at ease? Where can you rest? Where can you kind of, give yourself a chance to restore? And that's what I think everything moving to Pisces will bring us. So that's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, let's go on to
Capricorn.
Capricorn rising.
Oh,
Okay, that's mine, right? Okay. I keep forgetting. Okay, so for those of you with Capricorn rising, I hope you listen to the beginning of this video because it gives you a lot of good information to start with. But what we're really looking at is February is a time of endings. There's a lot that kind of indicates that. And the first thing I want to talk about is that blue bowling ball, which is Uranus, and it has been moving through your fifth house since, well, for about 7 years. So you want to think back and really understand how much change has occurred in your life around fifth house issues, how you give love, how you give of yourself. You can think of this house as your creativity, um, fun, pleasure, children, the fun part of children, not the difficult part of children. But it's really our creativity. So, children are a huge part of our creativity. So there's been a lot of change in that area over the years. Think about that. And now in February, there's a big focus for you with Capricorn rising in your second house. So there's a big focus on money, resources, your own understanding of your self-worth. And now we bring these together in a square aspect. There's a lot of stress on your money or your self-worth that's coming somehow from the area of how you give of yourself. What's that stress? Think about that stress. We're trying to think of how that would show up. Maybe your creative projects are costing too much money and you're feeling really stressed by that. Maybe your child has just chosen the most expensive college to go to and you're really struggling trying to figure out the how you're going to manage the cost of these things. You've got Capricorn rising. You're really serious about issues when it comes to ambition and money type issues anyway. So there's a lot of wherever Aquarius is, there's a lot of unusual thinking, but there's also a lot of rigid thinking in that area. And this is the area that is being really challenged by Uranus to change. And because it's a closing square and because there is an eclipse there on, I believe it's the 17th, is that right? 17th.
yeah.
That's where the eclipse is happening in that second house. Something around money and self-worth has to be closed down. What
Mm,
is it? Is it an attitude? Is it a way of investing your money? There's something there that needs to be closed down. There's some big stress. So think about what the stress is between your creativity and your money or self-worth
mm,
and consider what it is that you need to close down. This is a preparation process for a really big change that's happening in the early summer that's going to really wake you up to big changes in your day-to-day routines, your lifestyle itself. So, and that, there's an awareness of that because Uranus did already dip in there for a little while. There's an awareness of how you use your money and resources and how that's going to impact that change of lifestyle
yeah.
too.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think what I'm thinking about this, as I'm listening to you, and again, you've hit the nail on the head, Laurie. The thing that's occurring to me is also how the fifth house is the house of pleasure, and so in a way, it's the place where we get to be that delighted, playful child, like so that kind, and also more like the sensual sexual, pieces of like having lovers and but anyway, nonetheless, let's just call it pleasure and just that there's obviously tension between pleasure and money, right? I mean, on the one hand, you need money to have pleasure, right? But on the other hand, your hangups about money, especially with Capricorn rising, where you're conservative and whatever else, your hangups about money might be preventing you from
Uh-huh.
enjoying yourself. And I think that that's kind of what's the storyline there. I think there's some wiggle room to find the balance where, yeah, no, you don't want to blow all your money on one thing that's really enjoyable and then you're screwed, that's not the message. The message is to first of all, just not let yourself be damped down by like, oh, I can't have joy because I can't afford it. Like there's lots of ways to have joy that have nothing to do with money, right? I mean, really. So I think that that's the message here is like, what story can you shed, but also not, you don't want to bankrupt yourself again. So you're trying to figure out what's the balance, what's the storyline that you can let go of.
Yeah.
Um, and then once everything moves into Pisces, meaning Venus, Mercury, Sun, there's a Mercury retrograde cycle, and Mars in Pisces coming up, where you're going to kind of let yourself digest this stuff, let yourself sit with these changes, give yourself a chance to reset your own inner narrative.
Mhm.
And that
Mhm.
will come next. So that our next video will be about some of that stuff. So,
That's fascinating to think about. Yeah, there's some rigid idea about your own worth and your own connection to resources. There's some rigid idea there that needs to be released.
mhm. Yes, and I
That's
think,
lovely.
yeah, I think we covered it. I think so, because you already
I
talked about
think
the
I think
virtual.
so. Yeah. Yeah. Let's go on to Aquarius.
Okay. Okay. So those of you with Aquarius rising, we are talking here about the month of February. And the fact that this month is a lot about closings and endings. And it's really about closing down an old rigid storyline. And so for those of you with Aquarius rising, it's really interesting to contemplate where this is occurring. So let's start with Uranus, which we have been calling the bowling ball. And I was thinking it's the perfect thing to think of because the bowling ball rolls down and knocks all the pins down. And that's exactly what Uranus has been doing since 2018 in your fourth house. It's been rolling down the alley that represents your home life, the place that you live, the people you live with, and making big changes. Really since 2018, there's been some big shifts here. So that's kind of what that activity is. And then right now, this month of February, we are really in a moment of time when you can really close down a storyline that is not working for you, a rigidity. And for you, I mean, gosh, this is really happening.
Mhm.
Your sense of self, that your first house where the sun is in Aquarius and where these other planets are, there's a shift. Like that's where the spotlight is. So you might be feeling like, whoa, something's happening for me. The way I'm walking the world is different. There's something really being illuminated here. And this period of time is really an invitation to ask yourself, like, what do you want to shed? What is rigid about the way you feel about yourself, and then the way you're looking at your home life or your deepest kind of emotional stability, which the fourth house represents?
Mhm.
What is going on here? What can you honestly say to yourself, geez, this is not working for me. I want to step into a new way, because that's really what February is about. Examining what's not working, starting to close it, and then opening a new door to step forwards. And part of that is because of the solar eclipse on February 17th, which really reiterates this pattern that we're seeing of the square between these planets in Uranus. So pivot points, there's some sort of major pivot point in the way you show up in the world. And Gloria, what do you have to add to this scenario I'm painting?
Yeah, it's really fascinating to think of this for people with Aquarius rising because there is a way in which anyone with Aquarius rising shows up, a little bit quirky, a little bit unusual, but there's a rigidity in it. There's a coolness in it, right? And and there's something in that storyline of who I am that is being confronted by the changes that have occurred in the last 7 years around home and family. And that could be so many different things. It could have to do with, family members. It could have to do with the land you live on and the changes that you've made there that are really making you see or allowing you to see yourself differently. And this is an opportunity to present yourself in a new way, to decide, I can show up a different way. Maybe
Mhm.
you need to get a makeover. Maybe you need a new wardrobe. Maybe you need a makeover. There's some way of showing up, the way you show up in the world, that is asking for you to release the way it's been in the past and set a new storyline there. All of this to me is a preparation because Uranus is now going direct. It's going to be going into your fifth house before it encounters this kind of intensity. It's going to be going into your fifth house into Gemini. That is really so. This challenge, this conflict is preparing you to really wake up to what you have to offer and the pleasure you can receive through offering your creativity, through offering your love. There's a real awakening in that area, possibly a creative path ahead. But
Yeah.
this is preparing for that. Depending on your age, this could be preparing you to become a parent or to become, artistic or, whatever that is, or for falling in love.
Mhm.
There's a way that this is preparing you. Let's just say it
Yeah,
that way. This is preparing you to fall in love next summer.
that's the title.
Right. It may be
Yeah.
falling in love with a creative project or a child or a partner.
Yes. And I'm also just, I keep going back to this idea of what Aquarius represents. And, walking around as an Aquarius rising person, yeah, just as Laurie said, it might mean you show up in an unusual manner. But it also can speak to feeling alienated, feeling so different that you just don't
Mm,
fit.
yeah.
And I think that this period of time is an opportunity to shed the narrative that you have to do this all alone because you're kind of weird and whatever. This is the time to go, no, I am uniquely suited to reach out to groups, to inspire groups of people, to inspire collaboration. I mean, as an Aquarius rising, that is definitely part of the path. And so if you have those kinds of concerned, like, oh, I don't know, I feel kind of whatever. This is a wonderful time to say, you know what, it's time to shed feeling disconnected and
Mm.
walk into interconnection.
I
Um,
love that you said that.
I know, especially with Aquarius rising, right? It's like I just think
Yeah,
that could be a tough
yeah,
rising sign to walk around with,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah,
And
and with Pluto newly in that area, and last month in January, anyone with Aquarius rising has really encountered a lot of internal power dynamics.
mhm.
So that walking around feeling alienated has likely been really strong recently.
Mm, yes, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think just the final piece, just to say, this is kind of a bumpy month. There's a lot of pressure being put on us. There's a lot of potential for anxiety and stress and worry and all those things. And then as the planets slide into Pisces, so Venus and Mercury and the Sun and Mars are all going to end up in Pisces by March. They'll all be there. And that'll really give you a chance to kind of settle into this new narrative, to be tender with yourself, to nurture self-worth, let yourself shed grief, things that have kind of that you just need to allow and soften into a new sense of self. I think that's really what the Pisces will bring. So,
That's great. That's great.
okay.
Okay, moving on.
Last but not least, Pisces rising.
So, for people with Pisces rising, listen to the first part of the video because there's a lot of good information there that will help you understand more. But basically, in February 2026, we're looking at a time that really is bringing in a lot of outside pressure, a lot of pressure. And it's a time of endings. It's a time to close certain things down. Now, what you want to understand is that over the past 7 years, Uranus, which is represented by that big blue bowling ball there, that's been moving through your third house over these past years, 7 years or so. So Uranus changes things. It shakes things up. Jennie talks about it as a jackhammer. It's going to shift and change the dynamics in that area of your life. So, over this 7 year period of time, there's been a lot of change in how you use your voice, how you encounter um, the kinds of relationships that you don't really choose that are in your immediate environment, your neighbors, your siblings, yeah, those kind of relationships, and how you use your voice in your environment. So there's been a lot of change there, and you want to think about that as you understand that February is there's a lot of pressure on what's going on internally in a very deep area of your unconscious. You may be really having powerful, stressful dreams, or just, something is bubbling beneath the surface of your consciousness that may be very intense and uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
What you
Mm-hmm.
want to think about is this is a time of letting go. So, what is it that you're letting go of? What you're letting go is some unconscious ideas that you have about who you are and how you use your voice. There's something in that. And, there's a preparation in here for big changes in the home and family that will be coming in the summer. But for now, that eclipse happens there in your 12th house too. So you want to pay really careful attention to your dreams, to your internal mental processes, your internal understanding of your spiritual understanding. Pay attention to that area. There's something in there that you have some ideas about your own unconscious that you have probably held in a somewhat rigid manner that really need to be released.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah.
seems like a challenging one. But you have Pisces rising, so paying attention to your dreams should come a lot easier than it would to most of us,
Right.
right?
I know it is funny just noticing how, having a mutable sign of the mutable sign of Pisces on the ascendant means that you've got fixed signs kind of like in the deep unconscious and the way you communicate and navigate your environment. I mean, and I do think it'd be tremendously beneficial to think about how to break up stagnant way, any stagnant ways of navigating those two parts of your life and to kind of bring in a little more flow and relax a little bit about the way you carry yourself in those two areas because yeah, it is an interesting thing to think about. I think there could be a lot of attachment with Taurus in the third house to being seen as somebody who really is stable and conveys this stable image and it's okay that you're not. It's okay. You can show that you've been through stress. You can show that you've been through change with Uranus going through there. And I think that's the whole, when you add that solar eclipse in there that's happening on February 17th and just thinking clearly about, okay, what do I need to close the door on? And then just going with a wholly new view. I mean, this really has to do with your mindset. I think the third and
Yeah,
the 12th. It's like
yeah,
your mindset around learning and dealing with your regular environment and your mindset around your huge spiritual view, and how can you
right.
just introduce a bit more, something fresh and new into that, and let it seep in. But you're right, the 12th house is always weird. It's hard to kind of get at. It's hidden from us by definition.
Yeah. And when
Um,
you're told to let go of something in the 12th house, well, how do you do that?
right.
How do you do that? Well,
Yeah.
it'd be a good time to meditate, to, I don't know, have a therapist, have an astrology consultation, really trying
Yeah.
to understand some of what is below the surface.
Mm.
paying
I thought,
attention to your dreams. What?
well, the perfect thing is like going on a silent meditation retreat with all these other people because Aquarius is, other people, like is the collective, so I can imagine doing this internal process surrounded by other people doing the same internal process. Like that would be that's a good image for kind of
Yeah,
understanding
yeah,
that and how hard that is because you're naturally kind of chatty here with an air sign and now you have to be quiet with all these people. So I could see that could raise some issues.
yeah.
Um,
Interesting.
yeah.
I
And
like that
then
one.
this is part of a larger process. So once all the inner planets go into Pisces, which they start doing in the middle of February, Mercury has a retrograde there.
Mm,
You're going to have a chance to really absorb what has shifted, what you've allowed to be shed, and be kind to yourself. That Pisces rising, you're going to need to be kind of tender and kind after this process. So I would set aside some time if you can in February and March to have some alone time, if you can. I think it'd be necessary.
yeah,
So,
I think so
yeah.
too. Yeah. I think
Anything else?
we've come to the end.
Ta-da! Okay, let's wrap that one up. And thank you, Lori.
Thank you, Jenny. This has been absolutely wonderful, and I look forward to doing it again next month.
Yes, and thank you, everyone who's watching.
Yes. Have a
Okay,
good day. Have a good month.
that's right.